there's your cue. That's our theme music for this series. Children, go where I send thee. Today, I need to start with a question, and it's one everyone can answer in one way or another. Were you an obedient child growing up, looking around? Were you an obedient child? I have a mother and a child here looking at each other. Or were you Heidi's already putting up her. Were you the disobedient child? Which way did you come out on that? It makes a difference, doesn't it? It makes a difference how you live your life if you kind of fall into that the obedient mode or the disobedient mode. But we learn these things really early on, don't we? We learn to obey our parents. We learn to obey adults. We learn to obey teachers. Some of you learn to obey traffic codes. And the reason I know that, if you notice, there's some speed bumps we had installed in the driveway out there. So some of you obey traffic codes, and some of you obey, most of us obey the social conventions of the day. We know how to act in certain situations. We learn to obey the laws of gravity. And if we learn to obey all of these laws in all the areas of our lives just work better. We just get through life a little bit better. However, not everybody follows the laws obediently. In fact, some of us will really push the envelope, will really test out these laws. Like some people even test the laws of gravity. So clearly not everybody gets what goes up, right, must come down. We fight the laws of gravity, but you know what? We also fight sort of the physics of God. And that can be sad. I don't have a video of that, but yeah, maybe that works. A sad emoji. If we fight those physics of God, and I think all of us in our own way, we did the confession today, which means we all agree we're a bit broken in the face of God, which means all of us have fought the physics of God. Everybody except for one person. Here's your big test. You have a 50-50 chance to get it right. Was that? Had a 50-50 chance. It's either Jesus or God, right? So there's only one person that didn't fight the physics of God, but was really obedient. And that is true. It was Jesus. He's sent by God. That's the theme of the series. How was Jesus sent? Sent by God like an obedient son. That means he's modeling out the character of God. And so Jesus follows in this perfect righteousness. And then Jesus also sends. God sent Jesus. Jesus sends us. We are his current disciples. That means we're sent to follow God obediently too, to live obedience in, here's the fancy church word, we're to live obedience in righteousness through Jesus. What does that mean? You don't know, do you? That you've heard preachers say it 100 times. Well, we're going to look at that today, and hopefully we'll understand it a little bit more. What it means to live obediently in our daily lives. So if you look that up, sort of the idea of a biblical view of obedience, it's a very formal definition. It says compliance with an order or a request or a submission to somebody else's authority. Well, and when I think about that, I thought, that kind of sounds like, I had a dog once, and my dog was quite obedient, right? I had my dog, it would obey all kinds of commands by my voice. My dog would, some of you have been to my house and seen this, the dog would roll over, sit up, speak, all of those things. But, that idea of just obeying a voice, I don't know if that's exactly what God has intended for us, just to be like an obedient puppet that just does everything on command quite like that. But being obedient, Jesus' way, with Jesus' sense of obedience, that's a little bit different. Jesus is sent with a little bit different kind of obedience, and that's what I want to look at today. According to Erdman's Bible dictionary, it's a little softer of a definition. True obedience involves us physically hearing, and in that hearing inspires us, motivates us to trust and act in accordance with whatever the person has been encouraging us to do. So I want to take a look at what that looks like. So if you would open your Bibles to Matthew chapter 3, we're going to be looking at verses 13 through 17. Very famous, very familiar, for most of you, familiar story about the baptism of Jesus. So let's begin. Verse 13. Then Jesus came from Galilee to John at the Jordan to be baptized by him. John would have had prevented saying, I need to be baptized by you, and do you come to me? I want to stop there for a moment. You might be wondering why I have this white shirt here. I got a little fired up at the first service, and I thought I might need to make a wardrobe change. No, we're going to get to this in just a second. If it's piquing your curiosity, hang on one more minute. Jesus comes to John, but John isn't about to go along with the deal. John doesn't want to baptize Jesus. John says, well, this baptism, this is sort of this ritual cleansing. You need to repent, and basically you don't need to do these things. You are the Messiah. You're the sinless one. You're God's chosen. What are you doing here? In other words, what John is saying is, Jesus baptizing you makes about as much sense in modern day as me taking my dry clean shirt and just sending it right back. Why would I send my dry clean shirt back to the cleaners? Would that make sense? That's where you say no. Thank you. It would make no sense at all, because it's what? It's clean. It doesn't need to be cleaned again. John's saying, you're clean. You don't need to be cleansed again. So what happens? Let's keep reading. Let's pick back up with the story. But Jesus answers him, let it be so for now, for it is proper for us in this way to fulfill all righteousness. Remember that word. Then he consented. And when Jesus had been baptized, just as he came up out of the water, you know this story, suddenly the heavens were opened to him, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him. And a voice from heaven comes out as saying, this is my Son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased. You know that story. You've heard it before. Jesus says, let it be so for now. We have to do this thing. We need to do this. We need to fulfill all righteousness. So why? Why does John permit this? Why does Jesus say, do this now? Go along with me, John. This is important. So if you've been to church over the years, as you've heard this passage preached, the main commentary on this is the reason Jesus says do this now is this sense of identification. He wants to identify with humanity, because even though Jesus is sinless, he has no need, right, to get the shirt cleaned. He has no need for this washing. He's identifying with the human condition, and he's identifying with what God is requiring of all of us, all humankind, which is pretty simple: to trust God by humbly submitting, here's the word, obediently. And when we do that, it's basically fulfilling both the promises that are made in the past as they're coming to fruition in the present, and how they move on into the future. That is one interpretation. I think it is a true interpretation. But I think there can also be something else happening in the passage, and that's what I want us to focus on today. Jesus is obedient, but you have to ask the question, obedient in what? The Hebraic concept of righteousness is not so much a character, a personal quality, as it is a relational quality. And you've heard every time we talk about the understanding of God from the Hebraic point of view, it's always about relationship. So this one too, it's about relationship, such as the relationship between God and Abraham. And the relationship between God and Abraham is that Abraham lived out his life. He acted in such a way through obedience and trust. And God sees those signs of Abraham's obedience and trust, and the scripture says God credits to him as righteousness. Whatever was going on with Abraham, God looks at that faith, and it's counted by God as righteousness. But there's a bit of a problem, and every time you read a biblical story, and I hear people say this, sometimes it's a cop-out, but sometimes it's just true. We say, these are biblical characters, right? These are particular people at a particular time. It's not representative of all people. We're living in 2018. Don't tell us we need to be like Abraham, or don't tell us we need to be like a particular biblical character. Well, there's a bit of trouble in that. Because when we take that stance, we're sort of being a little bit disobedient. In other words, not every one of us is going to go along with God's laws, God's commandments. Not every one of us are going to be obedient to the laws of, just let me say figuratively speaking, of God's physics. The way God has set the world up to work. Kind of like that guy going up the mountain. We kind of try it the wrong way sometimes, and we end up on our heads. So I think we suffer from what I saw one writer called feline physics. Do you know what feline physics are? Cats are notoriously disobedient. That's why I'm a dog guy. Jody's a cat guy. I'm a dog guy. Dogs, obedient. I can have my dog do anything. Cats, so here's a little bit of feline physics, okay? Do you know about the law of cat inertia? This is very true. You can do an experiment today. A cat at rest will tend to remain at rest unless acted upon by some outside force, such as the can of the cat food opening up, right? The cat will come running. How about the law of cat sleeping? The law of cat sleeping. All cats must sleep with people whenever possible in a position as comfortable to the cat as possible, regardless of how uncomfortable it makes the person that they're snuggled up to, right? You know what I'm talking about. How about the law of cat obstruction? This is a good one. A cat must lie in a position as to obstruct the maximum amount of human foot traffic, right? You know what? How many of you are cat owners? Come on. All right, you got it. So last one, law of cat obedience resistance. We're talking about obeying today. Obedience resistance. A cat's resistance varies in proportion to a human's desire for the cat to do something, right? So if you try to get the cat to do it, cat's not going to go along. In the New Testament, we learn, I hope what you're going to get today from that passage I read, through the example of Jesus, that believers, that's you and I, we're called to a different kind of obedience. But in what? That's really where I'm stuck with this. And so I want to push on that a little bit. We've heard a million times, be obedient to God. In what? Here it is in one word, righteousness. Righteousness. Jesus and John, they come to terms over this whole idea of whether to clean your shirt again, to cleanse when you don't need it. And Jesus says, let it be so for now. We're going to do this thing. It's fitting for us in order to fulfill, if you read the passage, all righteousness. To fulfill all righteousness. Diakosune is the Greek word there. And that's the regular term when you read in the New Testament, righteousness, being righteous or righteousness, that's the word that's being used. And it means God's divine judicial approval. You know, what's correct, what's right in God's eyes. Righteousness, as we just read in this passage of Jesus' baptism, verse 15, it's just a Greek translation of an old Hebrew word. The original word is tiskata, got it right? Tiskata. And that literally means, I love the literal translation of this because the literal gives a picture that we can buy into and understand righteousness. Literally, it means the trail one walks. That's why you see the sermon graphic up there today. So the idea is the righteous is the one who walks the straight, this is my walking stick, the one who walks the straight path with God. Now that sounds a little more obtainable than just saying we have to be righteous. We're going to go, I don't really know how to, I don't know how to do that. Let's see how this path, the path one walks, the trail one walks. I want to show you how this works out in the Old Testament scriptures. Just one verse, Deuteronomy 6:25 says this: if we diligently observe the entire commandment before the Lord our God, as He commanded us, we'll be in the right. Now, you heard Jody read this earlier. A little bit different translation, but basically it's the same verse. Now, I want you to hear this verse now with that literal translation. Remember, it's a picture. We hold on to those things. Listen to it when we substitute obey with the path, the trail one walks. Here's how it sounds. And the Tescata, that's the trail, that's righteousness. The trail will be for us if we are careful to follow all these directions to the face of Yahweh, that means God, just as He directed us. In other words, we're walking down the trail. We're being righteous, and we'll be face to face with God if we do those things. You can think about it as being on the same path, a similar path, God's walking toward us on a path. We're on the same path, and somewhere at the other end is us. And we're walking, and God is walking. We're walking the same path. God's walking toward us, and hopefully we're trying our best to walk toward God. And you can see again that literal translation. You can see it played out. Just one verse again, Psalm 17:15. Listen for that idea of walking that trail. As for me, I shall behold your face in righteousness. That's the trail I walk. I will behold your face in righteousness. When I awake, I shall be satisfied, beholding your likeness. Again, we're kind of face to face. We're on the same path. We're on the same page, we could say figuratively. So throughout the whole Bible, God has given these, you hear these signposts pointing out the trail, the path one walks, that path of righteousness. And you can see that Jesus has been walking that trail. That's why He's righteous. And there's this matching bit of faithfulness going on. God is faithful and Jesus is faithful. They're on the same path. They're working together. It's righteous. And then God sends Jesus to us. Jesus is on the path, and He's calling us to be on the path. Again, there's this relationship of faithfulness. Jesus toward us, we're called to faith toward Jesus. And now Jesus sends us. We're sent as God sent Jesus, we are sent also. Jesus sends us saying, if you love me, if you call on the name, you call on my name, and if that's the title you want to bear in your life as a Christ follower, if you call on my name, if you love me, you'll stay on, this is righteousness, you'll stay on the straight path. You'll be righteous. Stay on that straight path, the path God has paved out before you. You'll follow the directions, just another word for commandments. You'll follow the guides, giving you lots of guides. Here they are, just follow them. You know, today, I don't need to even tell you, obedience is not very popular. You know, we're kind of in this counterculture where we want to fight everything rather than be obedient. We'd rather keep all the options open, right? Don't pin me in. So we may take a little side path, a side trail in our lives. Some of us do that and we get quite lost. Others kind of play with it, but it's not something to play with. Jody talked about that's interesting to have those prayers about drug addiction. You know, there's some side paths we can take, and we can really get hurt by that. Maybe we just think, just try this is a little more scenic route over here. I'll just go this way. And before you know it, you've lost the trail. You've run out of gas. You get a flat tire. You're stuck. The other day I was heading out to someone who lived out by Apopka. And if you know, on 46, they've now opened up the new little bit of the Wekiva Parkway. I don't know if you've been on that, but I thought for a change, I wanted to stay off that lovely I-4. How about you? So I told Elisa, let's go try this new thing. I'm not sure where it goes, but I think it hooks up. We'll be able to get over there to the far side of Apopka much easier. So we pop down on 46. Sure enough, get on the little Wekiva bypass, and I've got my GPS, and I'm looking. I've already programmed where we're going, so I won't get lost. And we're running along, and it's fine. It's perfect. And all of a sudden, the road stops, and my screen is just green, you know. Right? I'm in a swamp. There's no road. It's gone because the GPS has not caught up with the construction they did. So I'm off the grid. I am lost. And you know what happens when you go off the grid with your little GPS and you're lost?
Recalculating.
Did you know what it says?
Recalculating.
So it's trying to recalculate, but there's no path. It can't recalculate. It doesn't even know where we're going. We're just kind of lost. Wouldn't it be lovely if life had a little voice like that tells you you're off the path, you're off the grid, and calls you back and helps guide you? I hope what you're beginning to hear right now in the message is that's exactly what God does through Jesus Christ. Has the path, offers the guides if you pay attention to the signs along the way. Now, I live in Sanford over off 46, and heaven has come to Sanford because they built a Chick-fil-A, right? So I don't have to come over here anymore. As a matter of fact, they tore yours down if you live in Lake Mary. So now you're all coming to my Chick-fil-A, which means my Chick-fil-A is quite busy, and it has 2 circles going around it because they have 2 places to order. All these people taking your orders. There literally might be 50 cars in these circles circling around. It's like the wagon trains of old. They're circling around. And so as you're circling around waiting to give your order, the other guys are getting their order and trying to get out. So now they have this guy standing out there in his little vest. So he's directing the traffic, right? He's letting you know, okay, they've got their stuff. Let them out. Now you can go by. So you got to follow the directions. You must obey. You must be obedient. And you know what's the interesting thing? Even though we don't like to be obedient these days, everybody follows the directions. They're all being very obedient to the guy doing all this stuff. And I thought, that's very interesting. Very interesting. Because, you know, nobody needed any guides to find their way to the Chick-fil-A restaurant. We all got there. We sort of knew where the path was. Now, when we got there, we got extra guidelines on how to go, but we sort of knew, you know? And I think that's one way to help us understand something even more important about traveling in righteous obedience. We can get on the trail. We can choose that if we want. We can choose to get on the trail. And once traveling down that path, the trail one walks, that's righteousness, we get lots of guides and signposts. And they help us stay there. And they help us make those moves even closer to God. So we're called to walk the path. And there's an expectation. And it's a neat expectation because, you know, we looked at what righteous obedience meant in Jesus' actions. You know, that's also a term that talks about of relationship between God and humankind, you know, stressing that parties should be faithful to one another. That's a relationship. So God expects us to follow the path. We expect God to be there. We expect God to be giving us some signs. And it's beautiful when that works. So if God's on God's path, Our life goal for success, if we want it to continue in this way, in the fullness of years, is to check the clues. Keep looking. You can think GPS, you can think signposts, you can think guides. Make sure we're on the trail. That's righteousness. The trail one walks. Make sure, be checking that we're actually going in the right direction on God's pathway. And one of the ways you can check this, real quick, very simple, is by obeying the two greatest commandments, loving God and loving people. Loving God, loving people. You know, there's something about love that becomes something less apart from our obedience to God. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, in The Cost of Discipleship, he said it this way: only those who obey can truly believe, and only those who believe can obey. Okay, that's a little over the head for some of us. I like it to make it plain and simple. So theologian James Edwards says it quite simply. The more we obey God, the more real God becomes to us. And the greater our love grows, the more we love God, the more we become like Jesus, if we trust the trail. So I want to close with a story about, there was a fellow who was a missionary type, and he was trying to translate the Bible into one of the many Indian dialects. And so he's looking for words, just like we do the same thing here. We translate words and try to figure them out. So he's looking for a word for faith, but he can't find in that particular Indian dialect, he can't find a word that translates into faith in you know, the conception we have of that. So he's in there and he's working on it. He's trying to figure this thing out. He's having a bit of a difficult time. And while he's doing that, a young boy came into his office. So he saw the kid and he just motioned to him there was a chair in the corner. He said, just, you know, have a seat and I'll be with you in just a moment. So as he did that, the boy walked over to the chair and he starts to examine the chair. And he's kind of walking around the chair, and he's looking at it. And the missionary guy says, just have a seat. I'll be with you in just a minute. And again, the boy is he's continuing to just thoroughly examine this chair. He's sort of amazed. What is this? Then the missionary guy, the translator, realized what was going on. The boy had come from a very, very primitive village, and he'd never seen a Western-style chair, the way we take for granted, just a chair. So he wasn't sure he could sit on it. To him, it looked a little bit flimsy, and maybe it wouldn't bear his weight. So the boy asked a question in his native language, and it included a single word that meant this: can I give myself to this and know that it will hold me up? And the translator then knew he had found the perfect word for faith, something that will hold you up. So if you can say yes to God bearing the weight of your life, then it's time to be righteous, to walk a little further on the trail toward God. And if some people, I could tell by the prayers today, if some folks have been feeling a bit let down in life, it's really the only path that's available to us that Jesus says will absolutely hold us up.